All right, here we go. Journalism Corner. Let's talk about nuance. Let's talk about football analysis, and let's talk about how to have tact and respect when you deal with others. So, one of the recurring things and themes and questions that I get, and this pops up a lot with my clients, is how do I analyze a game tactically? And how do I watch a game so that I'm able to kind of write the same way you do and kind of analyze the game as thoroughly as you do? And this is a very interesting subject. And to be honest, it's one that I'm very passionate about because I think that collectively, I think we need to raise our consciousness of how to write things and analyze things, and so that we're able to have better discussions about football. So the most important thing, if there's only one thing you take away from this segment, it's this: nuance. Nuance, 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 nuance. Football analysis is science, basically. Science is basically we do a bunch of studies, we look at very long sample sizes, and we come up with the best possible answer we can possibly come up with. And you have to be very open-minded that even then, it's not truth and it's not fact. So can you be open-minded enough and just be able to accept that you may not be right about a particular thing? And if you notice, like in our podcast and in my style of writing in particular, but also like those who kind of understand the importance of nuance, and I would say the best football writers and the most intelligent football writers are the ones who understand nuance the most, in that we don't have answers in football. We only have the best possible kind of answer we can give you is that we've looked at this person's analytics. We've watched this person play a million times over 2-3 years. And based on that, we can say that for sure, that basically not for sure, but probably their defense on the flank is not as good as their defense in the middle of the park. And even then, it's not to say that that person can't play good defense on the wings. It just means the data that we have up until now is this. And so you'll notice in my writing that I basically bring every angle to the table possible. And if I say something like, James Rodriguez, for example, he can't play well defensively in this scheme. But if you ask him, if you give him a pressing role and a counter pressing role where the team is in sync, he thrives much better. But even still, there was this game where he was put in that situation where he did not do well. And on the flip side, he actually had one outlier where he played well in the middle of the field defensively in this game 2 years ago or something like that. And so effectively what I do is in my head, I've already thought ahead to what people are going to comment. And I've already kind of countered their argument in my article before they can even counter it for me. And that is basically what I want you to understand with this whole segment. It's that there is nuance to everything and there's a counter to everything. Are you willing to admit to yourself that there is a counter to what you're saying? And if you are willing to, then show it. Put it in your article, put it in your analysis, and just say, the counter to that is this. And there's another counter, and that's the counter to this. And it's just kind of a loop in that understand that we don't have answers. We don't even have like 100% concrete truths all across the park. We just have the best scientific answer we can give at the time, and that is a very calculated and educated guess because we've done the homework, we've done the research, we've analyzed the game tactically, we've looked at the underlying numbers, we've looked at long sample sizes. And that's very key. You have to look at very long sample sizes before you come to some kind of conclusion. And this is basically why while we analyze game to game, we also analyze season to season, and we do comparisons with other players, other teams. We look at the context. We look at the context of someone's passing accuracy, what position they're playing, and what kind of passes they're playing. We look at, we just look at every outlier possible. And by the way, it's kind of irresponsible if you don't do that. And we have no excuse. Right now, we have Football Reference, which is new-ish. And that basically gives us every single data piece we need. I mean, look, we could always have more. So there's obviously things that we don't have now, but we'll have maybe a year from now, maybe 10 years from now. But we have basically enough to look up and underlying analytics to make sure what we're saying is actually backed up. So the flip side of this is if you're an upcoming writer and you're not doing this, I'm going to be a little bit harsh here, but understand it's love, and understand that I used to be the person I'm speaking about right now. If you're not doing that kind of homework, especially if you're trying to get into the football journalism and analysis world, and you're not just some kind of person who's passively watching this sport, if you go into the mentions of a journalist or a writer or an analyst, and you kind of take a dig at them with a one-liner and say incorrect, or no, that's wrong, or no, I'm right, and you haven't done your homework, understand how disrespectful that is and what you're communicating to that person. First of all, you've burnt a bridge. Probably somebody you can connect with later if you're actually trying to get in this industry. So be tactful, be respectful, and B, you're also ignoring that they have probably done their homework, man. Like, I'm not saying every journalist is perfect with their analysis, and trust me, they're not. And you'd be surprised at how many people sit at press row and don't really even take notes. They're kind of just on their cell phone, not doing much. And that's not me generalizing. I'm just saying that those people exist. On the flip side, there are a lot of journalists press row who actually are doing a lot of great note taking, and they're looking at everything, and we're talking to each other press row. We're kind of bouncing ideas off of each other. Understand that they've done their homework. Like they're more informed about this than you. And look, you may be able to kind of sit down on your couch and talk yourself into saying, no, I'm right. You're probably not. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. It's just that if you're probably not looking and scrutinizing every single piece of off-ball movement, you're not looking at all the deeper analytics. And if you are, I applaud you for that. But understand that you don't need to tweet at somebody passive aggressively. You don't need to send passive aggressive messages to anybody, because if you're absolutely right about this, then there's a tactful way to do it, and there's a way to do it without with in a collaborative way and not from a defensive standpoint. So right now, I would say that one of the most underrated pieces of journalism and really in any industry, people are very much in a competitive mindset and not in a collaborative mindset. And collaboration goes a long way, especially if you're just starting out. And to me, collaboration is actually one of the best ways to build your following, because, maybe I'll get into that in a deeper segment. And that's something I talk to my clients about a lot, in that you need to collaborate to build your following. So just don't burn bridges. Even if you're absolutely right, even you're 100% so sure that you're right. And by the way, you're probably not. But even if you're like just right, and like God is looking up at you in the sky, be like, wow, great point, man. You are completely right. You really showed him. Even if that's true, there's a way to say and there's a way to not. And I always have a rule, like if you're emotional in the moment, just step away. You are not in the right mindset to get behind the keyboard. And trust me, I know this. And again, the reason I'm being harsh about this is because I've been that person before, and I've burnt bridges that I've actually been able to rebuild because of my recognition of that. You don't want to be the person who thinks they're always right, and they're constantly trying to tell people about it, not least the journalists who are actually doing their homework covering the sport. And again, if you're not emotional, you want to tweet it, be my guest. There's nothing wrong with doing that fundamentally. Just do it in a respectful way, and not in a passive aggressive way, but in a collaborative way, and always provide value. Be like, okay, hey, you can say something like, great point, or you don't have to sugarcoat it if you don't want to. You don't have to be insincere about it if you don't think it was a great point. But you can just be like, here's what I saw. This is what I think is actually happening, and kind of present it in a way that's not condescending. There's a great book. You may have or may not have read it. And if you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And Dale Carnegie is an awesome author. I mean, you should get into all of his books. And you don't have to agree with every single thing he says. But some of the principles in that book he talks about is like, even if you're right about something and you're so sure of it, what is actually the reward for proving somebody wrong? Especially in a public setting. And by the way, in a public setting, it's different obviously than a keyboard setting. In a keyboard setting, even if you're tactful, it can be interpreted in the wrong way. So like the person is not actually seeing your full intent. Maybe they're not seeing the beautiful smile behind the keyboard that you have. It's possible to misinterpret it, and maybe you're actually being very loving and kind and caring and tactful, and it can still be misinterpreted. But be sincere. If you're sincere enough and you're kind enough, usually that won't happen. But if you in a situation in a room with, like, let's say 10 other people, this is what Dale Carnegie talks about. It's not me, but I agree with it. And you're in a room and you're kind of that person where, like, okay, somebody says something in the room that could be very off base, to be fair, and they're completely wrong about it. In that moment, if you decide, okay, I'm going to prove this person wrong, what's the reward? That person will get embarrassed. And does that make you feel good afterwards? Or what's the alternative reality? That person, there's an alternative reality where that person doesn't get embarrassed and in fact doesn't believe anything you're saying and just starts arguing with you. And that takes the vibe and energy out of the room completely. Because trust me when I say, some people, no matter how much evidence you put towards them, they've already made up their mind about something. They have their favorite player. They have the player they hate. And it doesn't matter how much evidence you put forward, you can't shake them out of it. So there's no point of even trying. That person has to find themselves internally and fix that problem internally and be more open-minded on their own. You can't force that out of them. So consider all these things. And again, this is a byproduct of somebody not doing their analysis. If everybody is doing their homework and analyzing the game at a certain level, and understanding the nuances that come with it, then we're all kind of, by default, we're probably all collaborating anyway. And there's a difference between somebody who's collaborative and understands nuances and somebody who's not. And the ones who collaborate and understand the nuances, they thrive together. Case in point, the journalist press row who do that, they're bouncing ideas off of each other, understanding things. During the Managing Madrid podcast, it's much of the same. It's like, we kind of are able to vibe with each other because we're bouncing those ideas. We've all come to the podcast doing our homework. We're all informed. We understand the nuances. And then we can kind of inform each other's opinions in a collaborative way. But if you're not doing that, then it's hard to do that. And it probably puts you in a defensive mode. And it doesn't put you in the right mindset to collaborate. You start getting triggered for no reason. So there's my little, I don't know if you would want to call it rant. There was a little bit of emotion behind it. But it's all love, and trust me, I've been there. Like I know exactly what it's like to think you know something that you really don't. And I started to getting the hang of this maybe like 3-4 years ago, I'd say. But it's a work in progress. It's not perfect, but I know what it's like to be in that state, and it's hard to get shaken out of it. But maybe internally, even if you think you don't have this issue, maybe just consider that and just remind yourself. Nuance, long sample sizes, and tactful behavior when you're talking to other people, especially if you're trying to be a journalist and not a passive fan, and you want to be able to keep all those bridges unburnt, I guess is the word that you want to use here. So, yeah, hope you found this helpful. Feel free to reach out to me, keon@keonsobani.com. I have a lot of topics lined up for future Journalism Corners for the next several weeks, but always open to ideas. If there's specific questions that you have, I'll do my best to answer them. All right, take care. Thank you.